Amber's parents and extended family repeatedly favor another grandchild until, during a Florida trip, they buy an economy ticket for Amber's 8-year-old daughter Bella, leave her alone at the airport, and board their flight. Amber pursues legal action through criminal and civil proceedings, protective orders, therapy, reparations, and deliberate boundary setting. Amber and Bella rebuild a life and reclaim joy, traveling to Disney together, healing, and redefining family as chosen rather than inherited. Amber learned early to read the margins of family life, the sideways compliments, the way chairs were always pulled for someone else, the laughter that didn't include her daughter. In the kitchen before church, a plastic tiara on Emma's head glinted like an accusation as the adults cooed and rearranged the light to frame the perfect niece. Bella stood on the fringe, hands folded, eyes practicing joy like it was homework. Amber watched, a cold, careful observation forming in the space between each compliment her mother offered. The morning the trip was announced, the house smelled of burnt coffee and perfume. Amber's father clapped his hands and declared Florida plans with an ease that suggested this had been decided without debate. The room tilted with enthusiasm, hotel names, rides, coordinating schedules, until Bella stepped forward, breath small, and said she'd never been. She imagined the pirates, the parade, the glittered castle. Amber heard hope bloom in her daughter's voice like something vulnerable and sacred. Her mother's response closed like a hand over a flame. "We'll manage," she said, dismissive enough to bruise. Later, at Amber's kitchen table, the three of them sat in real conversation, Amber's questions careful, the promise requested explicit. A mother's look, a mixture of annoyance and entitlement, answered for everyone. It would be fine. Amber, already carrying the quiet ache of 50 small slights, reminded herself that standing firm could turn her into a caricature, the anxious mother. She wanted to be brave, so she allowed trust to be extended across the gulf of their history. She gave them money. She packed her daughter's stickers and favorite dress into a small suitcase and kissed until Bella's hand relaxed from resistance. Work, for Amber, was an immovable landscape that week. Deadlines had formality the family world never possessed. She stayed, laptop light matching the fluorescent hum of the office, but every minute away felt like a theft of air. The buzz came as a single, brutal note, messages that read like a contract being broken. Amber felt the room tilt. Time lost purchase. The office sound dimmed to a far hum, her grip on the phone stabbed at her palm. The words were plain, atomic in their cruelty. They were boarding. Come get her. There are moments when a person is split into two, the one who must remain professional and the one who runs. Amber ran. The parking lot blurred under her tires, a white band of pavement that promised rescue. She navigated the airport with a kind of animal certainty, the crowd airy swell, the announcements cascading like distant weather until she saw the bench, one small body curled into itself, a child turned small by abandonment. Bella's sobs filled the terminal like a physical ache. She did not understand betrayal fully, only its immediate consequences. Amber dropped to her knees and became a harbor. Bella's fingers dug into her shirt as if she could anchor herself to the single person left. The sound of security, the clipped voices of officers, the flashlight glare, these were all edges Amber would press into memory. When Officer Martinez asked the question, "Are you her mother?" Amber's answer was simple, raw, and final, yes. Around them the crowd parted like waves. The scene was not cinematic because of spectacle, it was cinematic because of the hollowing that comes when trust is erased in an instant. That night, after statements were given and forms signed, the small apartment felt too quiet. Bella slept, exhausted from crying, and Amber sat awake, stitching the world back together with paperwork and rage. The legal language, child endangerment, abandonment, sounded clinical next to the wet pillows and a child who now looked at small spaces differently. The bond between them was now a shield and a mission. Amber had always known the outlines of their family. Only now it was inked in a legal document, a line drawn, permanent, and necessary. The courtroom smelled like old wood and paper and power. Amber sat with a stack of receipts and a knot of evidence, a life reduced to timestamps and dollar amounts. Outside, Bella's small shoes made faint scuffs on hallway tiles as Rachel, doing the work of a chosen family, took her to the children's room. Inside, cameras angled, lawyers shuffled, and Amber looked at the people who had once been a continuing presence in their lives. They appeared as characters robbed of kindness by their own indifference. Flashbacks threaded into testimony. A living room where one house exploded with toys and the other subsisted on a sweater, a birthday cake shared like an afterthought, the whispered, cutting commentary about Bella's quietness at dinner. The prosecutor used these moments not for spectacle, but to show pattern, the tiny cruelties that normalize larger betrayals. Amber's voice held steady as she described handing over cash for airfare, tickets, and meals. She avoided melodrama. The facts did the work. Text pulsed on the screen in the courtroom's muted light, plain sentences that read like choices. We're boarding now, don't make us feel guilty. In cross-examination, the defense offered the usual fog, misunderstanding, haste, parental exhaustion. Amber's mother took the stand with a practiced trembling that smelled faintly of an actor preparing for a role, victim of circumstances. When the prosecutor scrolled to the message instructing Amber to collect her, the courtroom shifted. Those words, cold and logistical, cut sharper than any speech. The jurors leaned forward not because of a story of villainy, but because they watched a transaction of human responsibility become a legal matter of harm. Outside the courtroom, Bella learned to wear bravery like a jacket. Therapy introduced language for the thing that had been done to her. Abandonment became a word she could point to instead of a feeling she carried like a bruise. Dr. Sanders guided them through small practices, rituals around bedtime, new safety scripts for airports, affirmation games that rebuilt a child's internal narrative. Amber watched as the math of healing unfolded, a session at a time, then a week, then a month. There was no magic, only steady accretion, good memories, repeated actions, presence as the antidote to unpredictable desertion. The family's phone calls were an orchestra of denial and pressure. They dialed apology like a currency when it served them, a few tearful notes, a public claim of persecution, a demand for reconciliation. Amber learned the cost of listening. Allowing a voice to re-enter their orbit risked undoing the borders she'd fought to raise. Her attorney, practical and cold in cadence, advised the shield of a no-contact order. Amber thought of it as armor. What mattered now was Bella's world, predictable, chosen safe. As the criminal process creaked forward, the media angle emerged, neighbors curious, friends split, a private life published in snippets. Amber had no interest in spectacle, she wanted restoration. But the public gaze forced clarity. Sentences, fines, and restrictions were not the real objective. The goal was to make sure this choice, this terrifying calculation that valued comfort over a child's safety, would be recognized and remembered. Accountability mattered because it rewired consequence into the family's behavior. In the evenings, Amber and Bella rebuilt rituals like they were architects drafting a simple house, checklists for travel, extra hugs before sleep. We always call 5 minutes before I leave rule. Bella's painting practiced the same architecture, airports turned into doorways, shadows giving way to light. The legal momentum gave Amber agency. But the daily work of proving love lay in the repetition of small things, showing up to assemblies, making soup on bad days, staying late to pick up a friend. The arc of the story widened beyond a single night. It became a classroom in raising trust. The trial's halfway point brought a hard pivot. The family's public posture began to crack, not because they felt remorse, but because consequence made discomfort concrete. Television cameras that had lingered on the courthouse steps now picked up courtroom murmurs. Amber watched her mother writhe under cross-examination, the practiced narrative of "we didn't mean harm" fraying when texts and receipts were set beside each other like contradictory maps. But life is stubbornly complex. Amber discovered that legal victory would not automatically turn into a neat moral closure. Small power plays filtered in through third parties, chats from mutual acquaintances, anonymous comments on social posts, a neighbor's awkward conversation at the bus stop. The family's lawyer, pragmatic and sharp, proposed negotiation, dropped the civil suit if restitution was offered. Amber's attorney counseled restraint. Money could not unmake the night, but it could fund therapy and the trip that would replace the trauma with memory. Amber found herself calculating justice with spreadsheets, Therapy costs, missed workdays, the symbolic expense of reclaiming the celebration stolen from a child. Then a new pressure hit. Bella's nightmares intensified after a grocery store encounter where Amber's mother walked past as if forced anonymity would absolve her. The sight of that small figure clutching at Amber's side triggered a regression. Amber called Dr. Sanders. The therapist recommended slowing down the public displays and leaning into predictable micro-routines, extra bedtime stories, a ritual song before leaving the house, a tangible token Bella carried as a "we are together" object at airports. Amber felt the tug between making a public case and tending to private healing. She chose the latter. The press made a minor hero of Amber headlines, pleased at the mom who fought back. But with attention came intrusion. An old friend of Amber's mother appeared in court as a sympathetic witness, claiming the grandparents were good people who made a mistake. Amber's calming voice held on the stand as she answered questions clearly, each fact like a brick in a wall. Yet an unease had settled into her. What if the world's recognition was a hollow theater? Would punishment alter the nature of people who spent decades prioritizing appearance? Then the civil counterplay shifted into a concrete twist. Her parents' lawyer demanded the return of the money Amber had given for Bella's trip, reasoning that because the trip hadn't occurred, the funds belonged to them. The audacity struck Amber as grotesque. It forced the legal battle into a second lane, criminal culpability and financial restitution. Amber, who had limited appetite for escalation, now found herself in a bind. Accepting the return meant letting them win twice. They'd taken her daughter's safety and then her money. Refusing meant more litigation, more courtroom time, more emotional cost. This was the midpoint test. Justice wasn't a single verdict. It required persistence. Amber's lawyer moved fast, filing a counterclaim for the return of funds plus therapy costs. For Amber, the choice was moral and practical. Each filing was another assertive boundary. No, you cannot erase this by token apologies. No, you cannot ask for money after abandoning a child. The twist here is not surprise, but cumulative consequence, how a single cruel act spirals into legal, emotional, and financial reckoning, forcing Amber to keep choosing protection over the easier path of forgiveness for the sake of peace. Meanwhile, Bella painted. The airport piece changed. Shadows receded into a threshold of light, and small golden arcs suggested the possibility beyond pain. Her art became a compass, a way to orient the mid-story conflict into something the audience could hold, evidence not of vengeance, but of repair. Through courtrooms, countersuits, and grocery aisles, Amber and Bella's world contracted to essentials, truth, safety, and the slow restoration of a child's untroubled mornings. The courtroom reconvened amid a hum of quiet anticipation. Amber walked into the oak-paneled room feeling both armor and rawness. She had practiced testimony like a speech, but nothing could prepare her for the tidal force of seeing her daughter's pain translated into law. The prosecutor painted the sequence with clinical precision. Tickets purchased, economy for the child, first class for everyone else, texts that read like timestamps of choice. The visuals, text on the screen, receipts in a stack, kept the case from dissolving into argument. When Amber took the stand, something shifted in the air. She did not perform outrage. She described the small betrayals that accrue like rust. She spoke of Bella's face at Christmas, the quiet erosion of confidence, the muffled birthday. She described handing over cash in a voice that did not need to rise. The weight of her restraint made every word land harder. Jurors leaned forward, following the timeline like a map of ethical failure. The defense tried to reframe the narrative as misunderstanding and miscommunication. The judge ruled firmly on admissibility, making the record less pliable. A particularly wrenching moment came when the prosecutor displayed the exact message, a directive that dismissed guilt and prioritized departure. The words themselves were ordinary, almost banal, but they read then like a moral indictment. Amber's mother claimed she thought leaving Bella in an airport wouldn't harm her because there was staff and security. The absurdity of that claim, a defense that evaded the simple human duty of care, stung. It became obvious why Amber had felt compelled to escalate. The family's default conclusion was convenience over commitment. Outside the courthouse, life moved in deliberate smallness. Bella's therapy sessions became the place where she learned to name the moment when fear arrived and then practiced tools to move through it. Amber watched as the nighttime routines slowly reclaimed their ritual magic, tucking a stuffed rabbit into place, singing the same silly song, packing the same toothbrush in the same bag. The mundane repetition was the opposite of the family's cruelty. It was a deliberate repair kit being assembled piece by tender piece. At home, the civil machinery continued. Depositions were taken. The judge scheduled hearings with an efficiency that implied this might be more than moral victory. This was restitution. Amber learned the language of legal leverage, proof of intended services, evidence of misappropriation. The defense sustained a posture of indignation, as if the courtroom were an offense against family loyalty rather than a moral accounting. But the facts made sympathy scarce. Near the build to the climax, an unexpected moment of tenderness shifted perspective. Amber surprised Bella with a simple map of promises, things that would always happen when they traveled. Seats together, a clear call before departures, a ritual cupcake on the first night. Bella clung to the paper like talisman. The small ceremony, folding that paper, putting it into Bella's bag, was its own statement. It told the child, without legal jargon, that the world could feel safe again if there were patterns to count on. The stage was therefore set for the climax. Evidence would meet consequence, public testimony would meet private healing, and the courtroom would decide not simply on punitive terms, but on whether a family's casual cruelty could be catalogued and corrected. Amber had learned the cost of enforcement. It demanded relentless attention. But she had also learned the value of proof, that accountability could be a repair mechanism when accompanied by consistent tenderness. The jury filed back in like a collective breath. Amber felt time compress, years of small cruelties and one violent night folded into a handful of faces that would render judgment. When the foreperson stood, each syllable felt monumental. Guilty. The word landed with an acoustic finality that was both satisfying and bittersweet. Satisfaction because the truth had been acknowledged, bittersweet because no verdict could rescue the hours Bella had spent frightened and alone. Sentencing was a complicated choreography. The prosecutor argued for strong penalties shaped by the trauma inflicted on a child. The defense pleaded for leniency, citing clean records and family history. The judge, a person shaped by jurisprudence and a sense of proportionality, balanced precedent with the harm documented. Probation, fines, mandatory parenting classes, and community service. These were the tangible consequences. The protective order, however, felt like the core instrument of Amber's victory, a legal perimeter that would guard Bella's space for years. Amber watched her mother fold into herself. Relief mingled with rage painted across her face as the reality of no contact settled. The family had sought to maintain normalcy, but the legal apparatus refused to normalize what their choices had fractured. Amber felt neither triumph nor glee. She felt the odd, cool vantage of someone who had pulled a frayed fabric into place and sewn a seam that would hold. Outside, the civil suit moved in its own rhythm. Judges are practical. The courtroom did what courts do best, translate harm into restitution. The check that eventually arrived was not an apology. It bore no note of contrition. Amber deposited it with a detachment that surprised her. She used the funds for therapy and the trip she had dreamed of for Bella, one she would host not in spite of the past, but to override it with all that love could do. The trip itself was the other half of the climax, a reclaimed narrative. Amber booked seats together, the grand hotel with a view of the castle, simple rituals that made each moment reliable. Boarding the plane, seeing their names, Amber Hayes and Bella Hayes, side by side was a domestic liturgy. The flight attendants offered small kindnesses. Bella's eyes widened at legroom and the clink of porcelain. The castle on the horizon carried no legal symbolism. It was a private kingdom where nothing would move them apart. In the quiet after the verdict and the trip, Amber learned that justice and healing are different currencies. Law can coerce behavior and create legal boundaries. Love insists on soft work, nightly stories, showing up at school events, letting bedtime be long and unhurried. They both mattered. The courtroom contained an echo, a public acknowledgement that helped Amber feel less alone. But the single decisive image, the daughter who once sat abandoned and now pressed cheek to window in first class, was personal, lived proof that protection could be reclaimed. At night, Watching Bella sleep with a calm the months prior had denied her, Amber allowed a small, private satisfaction. The verdict would not always be enough to erase memory, but it had ensured that the family's default cruelty would carry consequence. In a world where comfort often trumped care, the judge's decision allocated consequence where it was due. Amber felt the steadiness of a woman who had chosen the harder route because it was necessary. The climax had given them law and memory. What followed would be the more quotidian, but no less heroic, business of becoming whole again. Months after the verdict, the house settled into rhythms that felt deliberate. Mornings were no longer rushed negotiations. They were a set of small rituals Amber and Bella performed like vows. A silly song at front door, a special toothbrush put in a travel pouch, a small token tucked into Bella's backpack. These were tiny commitments that, repeated, formed safety. Bella's art matured in the way of someone who has found vocabulary for complicated things. Her airport painting, once a portrayal of fear, had opened into a doorway of light. Teachers began to notice leadership and kindness emerging where panic had once lived. Amber watched the child move through classrooms and playgrounds with a quiet confidence that had been hard-won. When Bella accepted an invitation to a sleepover, one of those milestones that used to send her mother into a spiral, Amber felt a victory that no judge could grant. Contact attempts from the old family dwindled. Protective orders are not moral conversions, they are tools. The legal structure had been necessary, but it had never been the center. The center became this: a table where two people ate the same meal, plans made and kept, birthdays built with intention. There was a small, private ceremony the night before their first anniversary of the trip. Amber taped the old receipts to the underside of a keepsake box, not as triumph but as evidence. They had been through a season of fire and had come out with something that shimmered differently. Forgiveness, when it arrived, was quiet and chosen. Bella, in her growing wisdom, explained to Amber that forgiveness was not a passport to reconciliation, but a way to stop carrying the weight of anger. Amber understood this as a kind of maturity, a lesson born of art and therapy and many mornings spent tying sneakers. They practiced gratitude lists in the car, 3 things they were grateful for each evening, and the lists made ordinary days feel like gifts. There were grocery runs where the old family's faces flicked through aisles. Moments that used to bruise them now only confirmed a truth they had already embraced. Once, Amber saw her mother glance at them and look away, indifference like an old habit, but Bella squeezed her hand and said, "Good. Now I know." The statement landed like a bell. Knowledge, Amber realized, is a form of freedom. As seasons rotated, trips followed, not as defiant shows, but as the stitching of a life reclaimed. The Grand Hotel and Castle no longer symbolized revenge. They were places where laughter became regular and uninterrupted. Bella's bedside drawings filled with blue turned gold in places where light found a way through. Her resolution to help other children someday, perhaps as an art therapist, felt like the most beautiful outcome. The last scene is small and domestic. Winter, low light, 2 mugs on the kitchen counter. Bella places a painted card on the table, an image of 2 figures walking together beneath a wide sky. "For us," she says. Amber takes the card and folds it into her wallet. They step outside to watch the neighborhood fireworks, not as spectacle, but as ritual marking the ordinary miracle of morning after morning where they both wake safe. There is no cinematic reconciliation for everyone. There is no tidy reunion with the grandparents who left a child alone. There is instead a new map, chosen family, clear boundaries, and the daily work of protecting a child's small belief in safety. Amber tucks Bella in and says, with the steadiness of someone who has been tested and found resolute, "Always, every single time." Bella's sleepy smile answers, "Always." The frame holds on that exchange, 2 people, simple, whole enough to say the words they mean and to keep them.